audio and visual podcast, a weekly discussion about all things guitar building and some random tangents as well, featuring members of the Guitar Builders Collective from all around the world. The Guitar Builders Collective is a like-minded group of individuals that have come together to share their experiences, knowledge, and inspiration for guitar building. Each week you can join us in the live YouTube chat or catch up at a later point. It's also available as audio, where you'll miss out on seeing our lovely faces and some of the visuals we share along the way. You can also find the Guitar Builders Collective via our forum, over on Instagram, where we share images of members' builds. We've got a thriving Facebook group, and we do hope that no matter what your experience and knowledge is, you'll become a welcome member of this community too. Great, welcome everyone.
Hey.
Hello. Good morning.
So it's slightly different this week. We have got guests, but they've been on before. I'll introduce them in a moment. So we're going to have a topic to focus on. And one thing that came out of recent conversations we've had, and when our guests were on last time, was how guitars are designed, the whole sort of idea of designing a guitar from the point of view of someone making them, which is a lot of the Guitar Builders Collective, from the point of view of someone that wants to buy them, how could that be designed? Earlier in the week, we were talking about the idea of the design might be different in different locations. Different markets need different things, and obviously there's price points to everything as well. And I'm sure we'll go off on random tangents as well. So I'm Daniel from Devil & Sons Guitars. I've got Scott from Bonehead Guitars and Mark from Gutierrez Gutierrez over in Texas, both of them there. And then our return guests, we've got Andrew Knight from Knightro Guitars, who also works at a bigger company, Jackson Charvel. Is it Jackson Charvel?
Yeah, I do all the specialty brands that Fender has, yeah.
Specialty brands of Fender, nice. And then Mike from Ingold. Mike, is it Ingold Guitars now?
Yes, it is. We officially opened a new LLC, so it's Ingold Guitars. Again, thinking about trying to streamline this from for consumers. Yeah.
Yeah, do you know, I've been looking at lots of different people on Instagram, their companies and how they're titled, and obviously there's a lot of such and such guitars, but it's interesting, the branding, because I've been in contact with a few who have a sort of shared visual aesthetic to what I've got, to ask them questions and maybe collaborate with them, and a lot of them have, a bit like mine, slightly satanic names or connections to things which target their death metal audience, which I found quite interesting. We've all gone down that route for possibly the same reason. I'm not sure.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
satanic marketing. Who knew?
Yeah, satanic marketing. Yeah. Okay, so on YouTube, I quite regularly get questions about, what, I don't like that name. You shouldn't have that name. It's not appropriate. Or
I like it. I mean, it's not like it's
videos with names like that. I mean, most of the people I think that would play my guitars probably listen to music that has a lot of connotations of that kind of metal idea, death, crossroads of selling your soul, etc.
Do you think there's an intersection of Star Wars fans and death metal fans?
Well, this is the thing. I feel like a lot of my guitars would be better targeted towards people that are into science fiction and cosplay, as opposed to targeting guitarists, because I feel like if I went to a place where, like, for example, we'll talk about NAMM a bit later, but if I went to a cosplay convention, I think I'm more likely to find a guitarist there who would like one of my weird sci-fi guitars than if I went to a guitar convention where there might be someone that's into that kind of more extreme sci-fi.
Yeah, I always thought the movie Furiosa, where you had like those Mad Max folks on the the rigs, and there's that guy with a flamethrower guitar. I'm like, Daniel could have built that guitar. You know which guitar I'm talking about, right? That crazy.
Is he looking at the back? Did he build one?
Yeah, I'm wondering if he's going to pull one out now.
It is one of my go-to. Yeah. So when we talk about design later, I've got a series of books here that I go to quite a lot for inspiration, and a number of them are film props and film set books, because that goes with the sort of aesthetic I'm after. So there's been a lot of time when I've been painting a guitar or drawing up designs where I've just been flipping through this book.
Is that the Mad Max like set photos book? I have the same one. That's a really cool book.
I love that book. And
it's funny. Nobody questions the appropriateness of my name. I'm not sure what that means.
Oh, I've misplaced them. I've also got a lot of books of schematics of TV Starship and movie Starship designs, which I've used for inspiration as well.
I used to have a lot of those books, yeah. Oh, man.
Ray's just said in the chat that I would definitely make a flamethrower guitar. I feel like there was a period on YouTube where it felt like quite a few people were doing things like that, and I don't know if I've quite got the personality to make a flamethrower guitar and play it, and I definitely don't have the balls to sell one to someone that might, hurt a member with it.
I think I remember seeing Guitar Max do.
It was a rocket. It was a bottle rocket. Yeah, or something like that. Yeah. But look, Daniel, it doesn't have to be fire. It can be like a fire extinguisher guitar or like a shaving cream dispenser guitar. It could be like anything.
Yeah, you got to think about who you're marketing it to. If it was like a Fago guitar, you could sell it to ICP. If it was a Blood guitar, you could sell it to Guar. You've got so many options.
Yeah. If you're worried about selling flamethrower guitar, maybe sell two and have fire extinguisher guitar to go along with it. Just in case of emergency,
Just make one that sprays something and let them pick it.
Yeah, there you go.
Has anybody gotten sprayed at a Guar show before? Anybody? Oh,
wait a minute. Has anyone been to a Guar show other than you, Mark? Then
I have never managed to catch them live.
No, me neither.
I do want to though, because I know it's like an experience.
It's not just blood; it's other bodily fluids.
I've heard one of my first middle school girlfriends dated one of the guys from Guar for quite a while.
Wow.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Well, I did not expect our conversation 5 minutes in to hit this point. Amazing. Yeah. All right then. Well, maybe we can talk a bit about design. I mean, one thing that maybe could be a starting point for this is, Mike, when you were on last, or the first time you were on, and by the way, I'll put links. I haven't done it yet, but I'll put links in the video description to when Andrew and Mike were first on, so you can hear more about their backgrounds and more about what they do. We got onto chatting, and you mentioned that you used to be a tutor or a lecturer. Well, I don't know what you call them in America. In this country, we call them lecturers in design, and that one of your students was Andrew. So maybe we could just talk about that experience of how you met, what you actually were teaching or learning at that time, and how it's led on to guitars, or how it connects into guitars.
Yeah, sure. I was for 11 years employed by the University of Tampa, and I taught 2D and 3D design courses, and then I ran their wood shop and fabrication studios. And I actually don't know if, Andrew, were you actually one of my students, or you just worked for me in the wood shop?
Yeah, I was never in one of your classes. Yeah, it was just straight up at the wood shop, man.
I remember, my memory, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Andrew, but I remember being in the shop. The shop had open hours, and Andrew came strolling in, and in my mind, you already had a guitar with you. You're like, "Hey, do you run the wood shop?" And I was like, "Yep." And then Andrew was like, "Can I build guitars in here?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And I felt like that was about the first interaction that we ever had.
I think so. Yeah, that sounds about right.
And then because Andrew had, general woodshop knowledge, I ended up hiring Andrew to work as a woodshop assistant. So he managed the shop later in the evening hours, weekend hours when I was away. Mm-hmm. And then, gosh, you worked for me for a couple of years, didn't you, Andrew?
Yeah, the whole time I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. And we ended up just becoming good friends. And then when Andrew was building a guitar in the shop, I shadowed him. It was one of the first guitars I built from scratch. And I think
it was because Albert Lee.
It's hanging on the wall right next to me here. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
And I think because I had quite an extensive background in woodworking, and then had also done a ton of my own guitar repair and modification, building that first guitar was kind of like, I felt like it was a scary proposition. But then with Andrew there, I was like, oh, this is easy. This is like, yeah. I have the skills to do this. And then, I watched Andrew progress in his career with Knightro Guitars and eventually Jackson Charvel, and that was one of the things that inspired me to start doing it myself.
Amazing. I love the crossover of the tutor and the student learning from each other. So just a really basic step back, because I'm used to universities in the UK, and students only have access to certain parts of it. So like the wood shop, you'd only have access to it at certain times, or if you're on certain courses or done certain training. I think it's very rare you'd have access anymore in the evenings or weekends. It's very different when I was at college, how many years ago that was. It was open all the time as long as there was a tutor around or a technician around, you could go in. But is it that open in America?
No, in fact, so when I was doing my undergraduate degree, it was the same thing. It was just kind of open 24 hours. And retrospectively, I think how wildly unsafe it was that was the case. But when I got hired at UT, the specific task that I was given was to create a safety protocol for training students, and then training some students to be woodshop technicians who could monitor it in the evenings and on some weekend hours, so that students who were taking sculpture courses or painting courses had some hours that they could access it because I was just kind of there 9 to 5-ish, Right. So Andrew, again, having already a pretty extensive skill set in a wood shop, he was a super natural choice to come in and work for those evening and weekend hours.
Yeah. So for me, it was just like a few nights a week. I would be there from 5 to 9, something like that. Like it was only a few hours a night. And just making sure that if anyone came in, they left with all 10 fingers.
I had a really specific training protocol that every student who accessed the wood shop had to go through before they could use it at all. So they had to be trained by me. And then once they were trained by me, they had access to the shop. And there was only specific courses that got that training. Like painters needed to build canvas stretchers, and sculpture students obviously had a bunch of stuff to do. So, yeah.
And really, like most of the time, well, I mean, like college age kids, like, because I was older, I had gotten out of the army when I was there at UT. So I was, in my late 20s. So, seeing all these like 18, 19-year-old kids, like only the ones that are like motivated and want to be there are there at night. So like you didn't get anybody who was going to do something super dumb.
Yeah, right. That's true. I feel like even when I had that sort of all-round year access, only the people that were, and some of those are still working as artists, only the people that were really committed were going to be there all year round, really. So what was there any element of what you were doing that was sort of focused on design and development, or was it more that you were doing the woodworking, like the practical hands-on making skills?
Is that a me question or an Andrew question? Yeah.
I guess I'm throwing it out to both of you.
For me, I mean, well, because I was a sculpture student. So I mean, I guess everything I was doing was design in some way. As a student, I'm taking all the different art courses. But for woodshop stuff, because I was already building guitars, I was trying to like wedge that into every sculpture class I could. Like, it's like, hey, what if I did this in the form of a guitar? Like, because I'm trying to like, hey, I want to do work once. And thankfully, my professor was like, she was amazing. Like, I really loved taking her classes. And also, getting lucky enough to meet and work with Mike and be friends. And it's like, I just feel very lucky for that time in my life,
Because I guess when I was at university, and I still do a little bit of teaching at the university I went to, there wasn't much focus on theory per se. A lot of what we did was practical, so learning practical skills, and the theory element was more about learning to look at and discuss art, so talking about other artists, and potentially a little bit of history and how some artists connected together. But on the courses we were on, which were all practical, there wasn't anything looking at how art movements connected together. If there was any kind of, there was no design element. It was all kind of contemporary art. But if there was a design element, there was no kind of understanding of the history of design or how things connected to each other there.
Well, every university art department is going to have slightly different curriculum. I've worked at 4 different universities, and each of them were slightly different, but there's some common themes. So UT was like this, and previous institutions I was at were like this. Every incoming freshman has to take a set of core classes before they move into a specific area that they want to study. So, for instance, typically the survey would look like some kind of drawing course, some kind of 2-dimensional design course, some kind of 3-dimensional design course, some introduction to art history, and then maybe a little bit of introduction to theory. And so once a student has kind of taken all those, which is kind of a broad survey of what's available within an art and design department, then they might move into sculpture or graphic design or painting or whatever they're going to eventually spend their time doing. So when I was teaching at the university, I taught mostly those freshman year experience courses. So I taught art history, I taught 2D design, and I taught 3D design. I taught drawing on occasionally, but mostly those were the 3 that I taught. And so my design thinking brain was always on, because that was the curriculum that I was teaching all the time. And I have a bachelor's degree in sculpture and a master's degree in painting, so that design thinking in terms of being a maker, those 2 things were just kind of always married in my brain. I also worked in the museum industry building exhibits for a number of years. So those things all kind of coalesced, and guitar building has far and away been the thing that has used my skill sets the best of the many things that I've done professionally.
And if I'm right, both Mark and Scott also have a background with a bit of design involved.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how similar all our backgrounds are. It's pretty nuts. But I got into art through anthropology. So my degree was in physical anthropology, and I'm interested in art history just completely. And it was through art history that I'm like, oh, I just want to minor in art, and then which turned into another degree. I got a BFA in design, and so I actually worked as a designer, 2D print design for a while. I worked in a museum too, which is pretty crazy. When I was still in college, and then got into 3D design in college. So it's really similar how we all just kind of have the same backgrounds nearly.
Yeah.
I was once I was old enough to hold something, I was drawing. So I was always drawing. And, dumbass little kid coming out of high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. But, going to college. So I went into art, and actually it was graphics design, arc. 2 years in, I, changed gears and then wound up not getting a piece of paper at all. But there was an interesting experience because, you talking about the basic introductory courses everybody has to take. We were introduced to, everything from ceramics to, we had a color theory class. There were a lot of things in the first couple years that were good exposure to, mediums that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I don't know how much it contributed really, because I think my brain's always been, in that direction, but it was still a good experience.
I feel like the practical experience I had at university and what I have done in my arts education since has always been about that critical thinking, and critical thinking also from a making point of view, trying to encourage students when they're making to think about options, to rule things out, to try things out, and to sort of open up to the idea of any sort of failure as a way of exploring and learning. And that kind of creative thinking is something that I think is applicable across so many different fields, not just arts fields, but isn't really taught apart from in art. Part of my job for many years was going into primary schools and discussing how to teach creativity with teachers who always pigeonholed art as this a bit of colouring or drawing that you do on the side, not really thinking about it as a way of opening up, exploring things and linking to other curriculum areas.
That's actually a really interesting point, because I've been trying to think about, I got stepkids to deal with, and they're idiots, like kids. and I keep thinking, okay, so we're going through algebra, and everybody universally, I hate algebra, and when am I ever going to use it? And my argument has always been, you may not actually use actual algebra later in life, but the problem-solving skills and the critical thinking and working through problems, that's what it really teaches you, I think. I hadn't thought about, in the context of art and design, how it also teaches a lot of the same things. Go ahead and say
It's
it.
yeah. I've always. I mean, I know I've come across a quote. Talking about students being struggling with math classes. Oh, when am I ever gonna solve a quadratic formula again? Like whatever. It's not about it is. It's the same as like working out. Like when am I ever gonna actually lift 200 pounds? Whatever. It doesn't matter. Like it's about the training and like I know I can do this, and it's like doing the motion and being. Yeah, I don't know. The actual quote is much more appropriate, I guess. To yeah, I can't remember the exact thing, but it's about the process of learning, not what you're learning. Like,
yeah, I think
absolutely.
It may just be as simple as you actually have to think about this. This is hard, and you're going to have to actually commit and own the problem and put your mind to actually figuring it out. That may be, it may be that simple. I don't know, because that's a problem with kids. I've noticed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't imagine because I mean, Mike, because you've been a professor recently enough to like be around for like the rise of like people using like ChatGPT and all that stuff. It's like, do people? I mean, I'm sure people try to get away with that stuff all the time. Where it's like, yeah, I wrote this paper, and it's just like just like talk to me about art history, ChatGPT, and then they just spits it out at you. Like
I was getting out of teaching right as the rise of AI really started to make plagiarism an issue. But I mean, shoot, when the internet became a thing, I'm sure that faculty were having the exact same question, right? It's so easy to have access to information. How can we guarantee that the information the students are giving us is their own thoughts? Plagiarism has always been a problem, just presented in different forms. I'm a firm believer. I think you're absolutely right, Scott. Kids sometimes are scared of problem solving in general, right? But I think that's not because it's this generation of kids. I just think that's kids. That's a learning experience everybody has at a certain age, right? And so I have 3 children, and they're ranging in ages from 9 to 16, and people all the time talk about like this generation, Gen Z, as being a problematic generation. And I do not see it that way whatsoever. I think every generation looks at the one after it and is like, you guys are doing it wrong. And every generation does fine. I mean, the current socioeconomic landscape is a little different than it was when we were kids, and that they're going to struggle with their own problems as they move through the world. But every generation figures out their way to navigate their version of the world, which is different than the one that we have to navigate.
So exactly. And so I'm sitting here thinking, I don't remember what my breakthrough was. I don't remember the point where I, just discovered that you have to own the problem to get through it. You realize this isn't going away, and I can't work around it. I'm going to have to do this. I don't remember when that happened.
It probably wasn't an epiphany moment, right? That's something that sort of over the course of many experiences you eventually figure out and sort of slowly get better at, right? Like most things.
Yeah. But it's also I wish I could identify it so I can know how to help make it happen. But
it's really interesting from that point of view, but just from another point of view, from the design aspect, there's this other thing, right? Like I know that when I'm starting to design, there's like a lot of like frontal lobe, like contrived design, but then you get into like this flow, right? Where like the muses start pouring in, like there's that thing where you get into the zone or whatever you want to call it. So like what's that? Like that's not critical thinking at all.
There's a scientific. I'm gonna do a terrible job of explaining this, but there's a scientific thing that happens there in the brain. So people call it the flow state, and it has to do with the different parts of your brain communicating more efficiently. Like you said, like instead of all this frontal lobe stuff, being able to access information a little more freely in other parts of the brain. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but I do know that there is science behind that. That's not just a feeling. That's a real thing that happens in the brain. You finally let go of some like whatever is holding you back from actually doing good work, and your brain starts pinging off of the right places until you're in the flow state, whatever that exactly means.
Yeah, I remember a friend of mine just explained that to me, and using this analogy of it's that moment when you realize that 4 or 5 hours have passed and you haven't noticed. That's when you know that state's happening, because you're just so engrossed on that thing, the creativity maybe. I just want to quickly say that what you were just saying about Mike, about the Generation Z or Z or whatever we call it, wherever we are based. I have been thinking the same thing recently, that the problem with Gen Z is the problem that I've now reached an age where I see a problem in younger people.
Yeah.
And I was never aware of that problem with me that the older generations were seeing. The problem I'm having is my TikTok feed seems to occasionally talk about the problems of millennials, Gen Z, and boomers, but just skips my generation. It's like, what happened to me? I've been forgotten about.
What's
And
your generation, Daniel?
well, but I would say Gen X, maybe. I'm not millennial, definitely not millennial. I'm not a boomer. I'm that in between, surely.
Yeah. I'm with you there. Same age, so.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was the end of the 80s or early 90s was the cutoff for X. I can't remember.
Oh, it's the beginning of the 80s. So I think
it's like early mid 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, they sort of single out like between 80 and 83 as a weird in between that they call the lost generation, or I've heard them called the Oregon Trail generation as well. And
or Xennials.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Like I grew up without the internet. I got my first email address when I went to university, so I'm that's where I'm at.
Yeah, same.
I had to learn.
Yeah, I'm only slightly behind that. Yeah, because I didn't have I didn't have email until early high school. So
yes. Oh, this has become the old man conversation. Let's get off that. But one thing about the 80s, then, I was talking to someone about this in relation to glasses, but just fashion in general, is how things come back. Like there were these glasses that everyone seemed to wear in the 80s that were really big, and then I remember a few years ago working with lots of people in their 20s that all had these glasses that reminded me of my grandparents when I was little, and how fashionable it was. And one thing I think about with guitars is there, I don't know the history of guitars enough to know the comings and goings of fashion. A few years ago, I saw my first in production guitar with a fade burst that went like from one side to the other, as opposed to a sunburst kind of finish. I remember thinking that was just brilliant. I've never seen anything like it. And then I've got a book on Fender guitars, and they were doing that in the 70s. So it wasn't something new. It's just I'd just come across it. So I wonder how trends go. Mark did a video on Hollow Flash last year, and I've now seen kind of that kind of finish coming back on a few things. I don't know how or who dictates what fashions are, but as a designer, I wonder how you make choices. And Andrew, something I really want to ask you, as someone that works for bigger companies, is how, I'm sure there's things you can tell us and maybe can't tell us, but how are decisions made about either which guitars are going to carry on in production, or how new designs or old designs are going to come back? Is it simply sales, or is it trying to predict things, or is there another element there?
It's a little of both. So as a design engineer, like I'm not making the decisions like, oh, what do I get to make a lot of the time. I've got plenty of in my off time, or not off time, but kind of slower times at work, I'm always sketching. I've got a bunch of different concept things that I'm like, I'll pitch here, and they're like, ooh, what about this? And they're like, meh. But for a company of this size, a lot of it is just like, all right, what can we need something, that we can introduce in the second half of next year that's going to like just continue what we've been doing. So it's something typically that's got to be fresh enough to catch people's eyes in sales meetings and, or on the, store walls, of course. So a lot of it is just like, oh, we're going to refresh this color, or, oh, now we've got this set of DiMarzios, like whatever.
And who makes those decisions? Do you guys have like a marketing team that kind of like makes those decisions?
Yeah. So every brand has their own product manager. And then, so the product managers are kind of like in between the salespeople, the brand like VPs, and us. So there's a lot of research and pitching and ideation meetings that go on that I hear about after the fact, when it's just like, I get a spec sheet, and it's like, all right, I need this in 2 weeks. Okay. You know, and it's because it's quite a long process to go from that ideation stage to a finished product that you can sell. You know, it's usually about a year, like from when I design something to when it lands in stores.
And then what about if there's is there any talk about a new design? Does that ever happen? We need a new design, or is
Sure,
it
yeah.
we need equivalent of this company's design?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, and I've got a few that I've been kind of working on. But a lot of times it's tough to get past kind of the corporate layers, because it's like, okay, well, let me take a screenshot of this. I'm going to send it to the guys in legal. So then they'll, like, you know, image search and do whatever they're doing. And it's like, this is a little too close to brand whoever. And a lot of times, like, I don't see it because I'm looking at the actual, you know, very closely at the real perimeters. And I'm making sure as I'm doing stuff that there's no matching one-to-one.
On that note, Andrew, so when you go to the legal department, are we saying that certain body types can be like trademarked, or what?
It's not trademarked, because I know, like, headstocks, obviously you can trademark because that's a branding thing. But it's more that you don't want to give the impression that you're copying something. Like a famous example from just guitar and Jackson history. It's like, I can't do a production like Firebird, right? Like, right. That's not going to happen. Even though in the past, Jackson has done just straight up, yep, it's a Firebird. Like, but that was when they were kind of like a rogue, like not owned by Fender. They were their own separate entity. And that was also, you know, the 80s, when it was just, hey, we're going to do stuff. Okay. Like, they've got an interesting history as kind of a pirate brand, you know?
But actually, is that specifically because, oh, sorry, Mike, I was just going to get back on the Firebird thing real quick. Is that specifically because it's coming from like a huge brand like Gibson? Because, like, I have a Jackson Warrior. I love that guitar. But I noticed that, like, Ibanez has like an X-shaped guitar.
Yeah, the Xiphos,
Yeah, the Xiphos. And, like, so there's several other companies that have like these X-shaped guitars. So, like, what's the deal there?
It's, you know, for those, it's different enough, you know, where it's like, okay, it's obviously an X shape, but it's not, no lines match, right? So, you know, if you take like each guitar 1-to-1 and, you know, nothing actually matches, it's like, well, you can say it's inspired by this, but it's not a copy, right? Whereas, like, I mean, in my Firebird example, like, no, it was just a 1-to-1. Like, it was a copy. It was.
Wouldn't it also be true that X shape doesn't seem to be directly associated with any specific brand, whereas a Firebird is so obviously like a Gibson invention?
Well, and it's also like, you know, hey, who wants to pay for all those lawyers? Gibson. You know, and
the YouTube channel KDH.
Music man.
So KDH, a number of years ago, I came across him because he sort of blew up when he did a sort of a program, a video about Bob Chapman and his history, and it was quite controversial. But actually, I find him a really good source for researched information. And he had a video up last year where a company, I can't remember which one it was, a small company, had been had a cease and desist from Gibson for their flying V-shaped guitars.
I think I know that exact story you're talking about.
Yeah, it was so interesting. But maybe you'll remember the name of the company. But in the video, he looked at lots of different companies' V-shaped guitars, and he just simply took the photos and superimposed on top of each other, so you could see the very slight differences. And it's interesting what he was talking about as being, in his mind, enough of a difference to not be like the original, because some differences were very subtle, just about kind of where the V meets the fretboard, or how one is slightly off to the other, a bit longer than another, where the scratch plate's positioned and things. And then talking about the particular one who had the cease and desist video being so much closer than all the others to that Gibson one. And when you superimpose them, you can kind of see that. But at the same time, to me, they're all derivative of that Gibson Flying V. There's nothing about it that isn't.
Well, I mean, I think that's the difference between like, you know, because we're immersed in guitar world, right? And it's like we're looking for those differences. Like where it's like, you know, like but the average consumer or you know, lawyer who isn't a guitar designer is just like, that's a V shape, man. Like and that's kind of as far as it goes. Like, you know, whereas as builders, it's like, oh no, it's you know, the pick guard's different here, and like, you know, this tip is offset, and like it's a totally different guitar, man. Like they have to, you know, it's not unfortunately necessarily, it's not necessarily your perception all the time that matters. Like as
I would guess that Gibson is probably, they have a deep enough pockets and a big enough legal team that they can have some sort of formula where it's like they figure out how many parameters have to be how close to make it worth doing.
I was about to say that, like, what's the legal threshold for a copy? You know,
I guarantee there's some formula that they do.
They've got something figured out. Yeah.
Speaking of needing to know math, right, Scott?
Well, it's a great job for AI. I was going to say for you know, tracking down plagiarism was also a great job for AI.
It's also the point though where how big is the company you're suing? Are they big enough that their guitar design is becoming popular and you feel threatened by it, even though you're a big company? And are they big enough or small enough that they won't sue back or be able to counter sue?
Again, I'm sure it's worked into the formula, you know.
And when I said they were all derivative of the Flying V, I mean that in a kind of tribute way, not
of course,
that is a problem. And unfortunately, so I don't know if you've all seen this, but we had a guest on a few months ago, Les from Godfrey Guitars. He put up a post this week saying that he's giving up guitar building. Because he's had no new commissions or no jobs come in for enough time that it's no longer viable for him. And I messaged him, I had a brief back and forth, and he's saying, as he said in his post, you know, he's had a good run. He's so positive, Les. He'd had a good run. He wasn't expecting ever to be someone that made guitars. So it's excellent he's been able to do it, and now he's on to the next thing. But at the same time, he did point out there are companies now that are being quite successful with designs that are very, very similar to his, and that's got to hurt in some ways. I think even if you're as positive as he is, that can't be a good thing. So taking from the granddaddy of guitar designs is different to taking from a small one-off. But where is that line drawn? Where does the small company become big enough that you shouldn't be ripping them off, or you can rip them off?
We talked a little bit about this the last time I was on the podcast, right? And Daniel, you were talking about that guitar that a friend of yours or a customer had made a tribute to one of yours and then sold it as yours, which is horrible. I mean, I would say unless it's for personal use, copying somebody else's designs, especially small builders, is really a hard pass, you know?
Yeah. At the same time, it is very hard in the world we live in when, for example, my Instagram feed, I almost exclusively follow guitar related companies and some artists and designers. So I just open it up, I flip through it. In a minute, I could have seen 50 different guitars like that. They're going to sink into your head. That's going to be there, even if you don't realize it. It's hard to avoid that.
Mm-hmm. It's, you know, a lot of times, like, just that reminds me, like, in the design process, a lot of times, like, just if I'm drawing something, right, and I'll start from scratch, and I'm just kind of sketching around, and you know, sometimes I'll use like I'll just use like photos of different stuff just as like a size reference. Like, okay, like I know generally the size of a soloist, right, or whatever. But that's never like up like constantly while I'm working. But you know, sometimes, you know, I'll get to the end of like drawing out a body shape and I'll look at it and be like, all right, cool. Yeah. You know, and then I'll just, you know, I'll flip through my reference photos again. It's like, oh damn, I've just made a copy of X, like without even like thinking about it, because I've seen these things so much. It's like oh man, I gotta start over. It's so subconscious. You've seen these shapes a million times, and it's like, oh crap, I made another strat. So that's part of the fun for me. It's like figuring out like, how to play enough with familiar source material where it's like, you want to make something that is very obviously a useful and comfortable guitar, but not something that is what exists already. Like it's fun figuring out where that line is.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you can like throw that line out. And so like some of the guitars that I built where I don't even think about comfort anymore. Like I'll literally put something sharp right there at the forearm just because it looks cool.
Sure. Yeah.
That's exactly where my next question was going, is when you're designing, and in a minute, Mike, I'm going to share some of your images of your guitars to talk about your process, but where do we sort of draw a line between thinking about the function of it and thinking about the form of it and what it looks like?
I mean, for me, like it's really different, like coming from being an indie builder to being like Mr. Corporate now. It's totally different. Like, as an indie builder, I have, I had a lot more room to experiment. Like for my own stuff, it's like I can make a one-off and it's like, and try something weird. And oftentimes I did, just to be like, oh, this is an interesting idea. Let me just, carve one out real quick. And that's, oh no, I actually don't like that. Great. But in my current role, it's like, it's gotta be like something that we can make 150 plus units and they are going to sell, like, or else, like, yeah, so it's funny, like having been on both sides of that coin now.
So before we carry on with this conversation, I'm going to go off on a tangent because there's a question that's come up a number of times in discussion since we had you on, Andrew, where we're talking about like the scale of how many guitars are built by companies. So when you're saying 150, actually with like a standard product line of any of the companies, like with Jackson Company, how many sort of guitars are we talking about being made?
Oh man,
are we talking about hundreds, or are we talking about thousands?
Oh yeah,
or are we talking about tens of thousands?
It depends on the line. So as you go from the the low to mid budget guitars, like up to the expensive stuff, like there's more. It's kind of like a pyramid, right? Like the more expensive you go, the less units per model you get. So in the so my main line that I've been doing is the American series stuff. So it's built in Corona, right? Those are per color 250, like, and that's it. Because they're expensive, and they're expensive to make. And going down to like something that's made in like Indonesia, like the X series or Pro series stuff, like those are like several hundred units like per model. Yeah,
I guess for in the discussions we've had, the reason that's come up is just talking about how pricing works, because obviously if you're making one guitar, buying one bridge, it's very different to buying 700 bridges.
Oh sure. Well, and that and buying in bulk, like you get the there are price advantages to that, which I mean no indie builder can come even close to. Like Mike, you're never gonna buy 800 Hipshot hardtail bridges. Like you won't use those up in your life. Yeah. Nope. But that's like every 6 months, like for Charvel or Jackson or any of the pointy guitar companies, and so there's a different constraint from, it's not price, it's like how quickly can that supplier make these and sell them to us, like, because it's like, hey, we gotta make all this stuff, and they're like, well, you're one of 8 companies that's buying 1,000 of these things. Like, So we got to make all this stuff. And then, it kind of, that's how supply chains end up like,
it's probably when I was getting ready for NAMM, actually Hipshot was like, they couldn't turn around. I ordered like 12 bridges or 8 bridges from them, which is a lot for me. Right.
Yeah.
And they're like, I was like, dudes, I need these like yesterday. I need to start assembling guitars. And they're like, they're in plating. And they probably had some big order from Jackson or somebody also for NAMM. And that's my supply chain.
Well, it's everybody. Cause the months leading up to NAMM, like November and December, like, I've got like all these guitars like at the office. And being here in Arizona, a lot of stuff gets shipped from, Mexico, China, Indonesia, wherever. It is like negative 10,000% humidity here. So everything just like has crazy fret sprout. Like, so the months leading up to NAMM, we're all just going crazy fret filing, like constantly. It is just like, the prep is just like, it's a busy time because it's
that cannot be overstated. When I got out to California and I got my guitars up in the booth for NAMM, I'm meticulous about fretwork. And so I was really excited about having people play these. By the third day, the fret sprout was so terrible. On a handful of the maple necks in particular, maple fingerboards, I put sold signs on guitars that were not sold just because I didn't want people picking them up because I didn't want them to think that's what my fretwork was like.
Well, so that is something I've noticed. Like, so as a builder that was based in Florida, like, I would sometimes get like an email, like, say, hey man, like, what's up with these frets? I'm like, what are you talking about? They're great. Like, because we're coming from 90% humidity to wherever else in the country or world it goes where it's not that. Like, so that is, that was funny. Like transitioning out of like super humid, like Florida to like, just like, it's dead bone dry out here. So anything that comes here within 2 or 3 days is just like little razor blades, man.
It's like SpongeBob out of water.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah.
I'm actually designing a dehumidification box to put all my necks in before I do fretwork.
That's brilliant. Yeah. So, and we do that. So like at our factory in Ensenada, there's a dedicated warehouse building with like low temperature kilns to season necks. Like that is all that warehouse does.
That's so interesting because I had a problem recently with a guitar I sent to America that I'd taken to a few shows here. Loads of people played it. No one had commented on bad frets or anything. They'd all been impressed, and I had a few offers to buy it, but they're all too low. Someone in America bought it. I sent it out there, and there's just loads of problems with the fretwork. And I thought maybe that's to do with the shipping and the temperature going. I wonder what. I'm going to have to find out what part of America is in now to see if it was a humidity thing as well. Because I couldn't quite work out what had gone on. But yeah, interesting.
Very well could be. Yeah.
Anyway, that's off tangent. So if I just put on a moment, Mike, some of your designs. I know we talked about your design process before, and there's no real need to talk about form over function here because they're clearly very functional. But unlike some of mine, maybe. What I wanted to know was, at what point in your process, and again, we have covered this a bit, I think. What point in your process did you start to realize how your designs gel together and what makes your design yours? How we look at this, we know it's an Ingold guitar, but why is that, and how did those choices come about?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer succinctly. The first guitar body that I designed was the model that I call the Milton, which is just a solid body, 6-string guitar. And that one was the only thing I made for quite a while. That was the only thing I made and sold. And based on the success of that, I had someone ask me if I could do a bass guitar. And they were like, with a similar aesthetic. And so I had a commission to do a bass guitar before I'd ever designed one. And so the challenge was sort of put on me then to design something that felt like it could be a sibling to the guitar design that I had done. And then moving through the rest of the lineup, that's always been the case. I had a commission to do a thing before I had ever done the thing. And so I was kind of, I was forced to work within a design language that had to be governed by that initial Milton design that I had created a couple of years prior.
Right.
That working in design and teaching design, I felt like that was a really nice parameter. I'm big on creating rules for yourself. I think that if you don't create rules for yourself in the design environment, often you end up on tangents, and those tangents can be useful. But if you're trying to create what would be a cohesive body of work from a design standpoint, having a sort of source material that you're perpetually referring back to, comparing, contrasting, it's a really useful sort of guideline to help you create, again, a series of guitars that all feel like they fit within one design language.
Yeah, absolutely. So the implication there was you made this first guitar. If you'd gone on and made other guitars and one of those was a different shape but ended up being the big seller that people came back to, that could have been.
It certainly could have been. Yeah, if I had not had any sales and just made something completely different and that one had caught on, I may have been stuck within a different design language based on whichever one seemed to have caught on. I mean, then there's also the design influences that live in my brain. We were kind of talking about that earlier. Like, you scroll through Instagram, and like you, my feed is pretty much all guitar builders and then some artists and some designers. So there's a certain sort of aesthetic that I'm attracted to. And in the feed, in any kind of visual information I digest, I've kind of curated my interests to be an inspirational feed for me. And so if those kinds of things are always rolling around in my head, then that inevitably will be regurgitated when I get to my design process. I'm, as much as I actually love what Andrew does with Jackson and what Andrew does with Knightro, that's just not at all what I do. And it's not the aesthetic that I look at. Like, that's not this thing that's showing up in my feed. So a lot of my feed is like retrofuturistic design, 50s and 60s cars, you know, that kind of thing. And so that is what lives in my brain, will then inform my design choices when I begin working on guitars.
I've just had to do a little bit of writing about design, how we find inspiration and things, and that curating your feed is really important. I always, with students, I guess when I first started doing teaching, we were using sketchbooks to collect things in, to draw designs in. But now I'm always talking about having a sort of mood board or a collection, like you're talking about, of images that you can access digitally to look back on, and that just being sort of bubbling over in your brain is, I find that really important.
Yeah, we live in this era where you are bombarded by images all day. And so being thoughtful about how you bombard yourself if you work in a design related field is really important. You know, you want to curate the things that your eyes are digesting so that when it comes time to do your creative work, the inspiration that lives in your brain is worthwhile.
So sort of linked here is something that you've said, because you were not forced, but you ended up in this direction because of the sales. So that means your design was appealing to other people. But I was wondering how much you have to make decisions, or all of us have to make decisions when we're designing something about those sales in the future. Because I've definitely come to a point with my guitar building that I've got to stop maybe either building the guitars I build because I haven't got the audience for it, or I've got to try and find that audience for those guitars. I can't just do what I want anymore. I've got to find the connection to make it viable.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I feel lucky in that the Milton design that caught on and the subsequent models that I've made since are designs I love. So I'm happy to be building them, not for sales, but because they're guitars I truly visually am attracted to, and from a playability standpoint am attracted to. But for instance, right now I am working on a baritone design, and I'm stuck. I'm like having writer's block with this design. I can't seem to figure out another body shape that fits within the design language I've curated for myself that will work for a baritone guitar. So have I pigeonholed myself a little bit? I suppose so. But I think any person who works in product lines has those moments, right? You want to find something that fits the family, but can stand on its own as a unique and worthwhile object. And that's, once you have 5, 6 guitars, what does that 7th one look like? It becomes a real challenge, you know?
So Andrew, is there like a Bible for the different companies you work for, saying if you're designing for this company, these elements have to be there? Or
sure. Yeah. So we on the Jackson side, you know, it's the Jackson DNA, right? So like there are certain like things that like, you know, if you're doing a bolt-on guitar, like you know, and this is all like kind of measurement stuff. Like, hey, the neck pocket is always this deep, this angle. You know, these are like the standards that have been set over the history of this brand.
Probably
so
for
there's
tooling.
Sorry.
Probably a lot for tooling.
Oh, sure. Well, of course. Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that is exactly. It's you know, these are factory products, so it's got to fit the parameters of the machines that we have to build stuff in. And a lot of that is also just historical precedent. Like, you know, a lot of people that are fans of larger brands, like they want that thing. So it's like, okay, in some cases, how do you balance doing something new with this brand versus like, well, no, I want the 80s version still. It's like, you know, so that's kind of where like multiple product lines end up coming from too, right? Where it's like, we've got the ultra modern, like the MDKs and the modern dinkies, where it's like, oh, we've got like multi-scale and Evertune and big old bevels and all that stuff. And then we've also got like, you know, like the Virtuoso is just like, it's just a straight up bolt-on Jackson. Like that's all it is. Like it's, you know, aside from a couple specific pieces of hardware, it's pretty well identical to what you could get in terms of spec to like 90s and 80s Jacksons.
Right. I find it interesting that of course, the design is partly controlled by the manufacturer and the factory setup and the tools you have. It's like what Mike was saying. It's good to have some sort of limitations in your design, and a limitation of what you've got to already make them on is integral to.
Do any of you other guys feel that way? I know that I'm at a point in production where I definitely have to think that way about, as I'm working on a new design. It's like, what am I already good at on my CNC? What am I already good at in my process, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time I'm making a new guitar?
And personally, I've made 33, and virtually every one I'm looking for something I haven't done before that's going to be a weird challenge, and you know. But I'm definitely not your normal situation.
I mean, I've definitely found it because I've realised I need to try and focus on something that's going to make the business more viable. And the thing that I do a lot is do something like Scott is different every time. Sometimes that involves a new bit of equipment or a new way of working or buying in some new materials. And what I really need to try and do is take advantage of the stock materials I've got and the tooling that I've already have to try and keep the cost down for each guitar I'm making at the moment. Try to find ways to make everything different, but not have to keep buying new equipment or new tools. I'm not saying you need different tools for everything, but I had been working towards doing certain types of inlays that I would definitely need a CNC for or have someone else make them. But I've gone back on that to try and carry on doing it in the way I was by hand, because I can't afford to spend the cost of selling another guitar on buying new stock and new equipment. It needs to stop going back into itself, but go back into my savings or my debt, whatever.
There's a tricky thing where, like, if you think about paying for your time, though. So one of the things that I outsourced for the guitars I built for NAMM was I had them painted by somebody else. First time I'd ever done that, and it was worth it. It was for time, if nothing else. I mean, I think of guitar finishing as probably the most single labor-intensive, time-consuming step in the process of building a guitar, and to be able to outsource paint to somebody was like, oh my God, I've just freed up a month of time for other things that I can be doing, you know, on these guitars. And it was huge for me. I'm also a control freak and kind of OCD. So in my brain, I had to make some compromises about how the finishes turned out. Not that my paint guy didn't do a great job. He did a fantastic job, but it wasn't my job, you know, and that was hard for me to give up.
Did you use Mo?
What's that?
Did you use Mo over there?
Yeah, I totally used Mo. So Mo used to be the custom
dude.
good. Oh, he's amazing. And this is the weirdest thing. So there's this guy named Mo Colors who was the custom painter for Dean back in the 90s. So if you ever saw like Dave Mustaine, Dimebag Darrell, Lightning Bolt, Mo was the guy who did all of those. And there was another small company in Tampa called Somnium Guitars. And the guy who runs it, I think his name is Mark as well. He just came by the shop one day and we're just chatting about guitar building. And he brought one of his guitars. I was like, oh, the paint's really nice on this. Do you do your own paint? He's like, no, I have this guy Mo Colors do it. And I was like, where's that guy? He's like, he's around. He's like, I think he's not far from here. Find Mo on Instagram and realize his shop is literally 100 yards from my shop. And I was like, how fortuitous is that? Yeah. So I walk over there with bodies, drop them off, have a beer with Mo, and then walk back to my shop. Like, it's the best situation ever.
He's like the nicest dude too. Because he's also, aside from guitars, he does like custom motorcycles and car parts and all sorts of stuff. Just a general interesting stuff painter. So you always go in and he's got some like wacky, crazy 70s Honda CB, whatever. Like he's just finished up and it's like, oh, this is going to go to this magazine. It's like, oh shit, that's cool. But so he's brilliant, like great painter too. Like, man. Yeah.
And I'm a misunderstanding. Is Mo Colors his company name or is his surname Colors?
So his first name is Mo. I actually have no idea what his last name is, but he goes by Mo Colors.
Yeah. Oh,
that's
yeah. I very much hope that is his surname.
And what I was getting at was the time versus paying somebody. Is it Roberts? Okay. So you were saying like you had outsourced or you were thinking about outsourcing your inlays to somebody else or buying a tool. This is one of those things like Mo's not cheap. So to have him paint one of my guitars was like big out-of-pocket cost for me. But then when I weighed against what I would want to pay myself hourly, as if I get to pay myself hourly, but if I wanted to pay myself hourly, how much it would cost to pay me to do the paint, I would have been more expensive. So, when you start thinking about it from a time perspective, sometimes paying that money to somebody else is totally worth it.
Menno asked, how long is the turnaround mode? Is that close? Is it quite a quick process for you then?
Yeah. Well, I will also say this. Mo is at a point, I think, in his career where he gets to do whatever he wants. Right, so he doesn't paint everybody's guitars and he doesn't paint everybody's motorcycles. So I had the advantage of one, being around the corner, and then because we're around the corner, becoming buddies with Mo. So turnaround time for me was pretty quick, but I've seen some stuff sit in his shop a little bit longer between you and I. And, but all the work he does is fantastic. He was great for me. I think he painted 8 guitars for me for NAMM, and from the time I dropped off the first one to the time I got the last one back was maybe a little over a month. Super fast.
Yeah. I mean, on that, I have to try and cut costs. I did invest and I rebuilt my spray booth, and that saved me so much money and time because, I had to buy some new equipment, which was quite costly, but I've already saved that in paint because buying paint for a spray gun as opposed to cans that I was previously using is so much cheaper, and the finish, it needs less work. I mean, I'm pretty good with the cans, but the gun's much better. Earlier on, Eddie in the chat asked us when we're talking about generations, aside from any different ages, what point did guitar building come into our lives?
I mean, I got my first guitar when I was 11 or 12, maybe. And it was a 1970s Japanese acoustic made by a company called Madeira, which was a subsidiary of Guild at the time. And it was a piece of shit. I mean, it was really horrible guitar. So pretty much from day one, I had to start figuring out setup stuff, I think this was in the early 90s. I think I went to the library and got a book about guitars and learned what a truss rod was. And, from pretty early on, I was already trying to figure out how to be my own tech.
I had kind of a similar experience because, I think I was probably 10 or 11 when, my parents got me like, oh, I got this classical guitar that was probably I don't know, it can't have been more than $100, which is obviously very appreciated, but like as a guitar, it's like, oh man, like it's unplayable, like it's terrible. And also it's a nylon string. It's nowhere near like the music that I was into, or like it's like, what am I gonna do with this? So like that just kind of like lived in my closet for a few years, like, and once I got as I was into high school, I was 13 or 14, and like got my first like electric guitar. I was like, aha, here we go. Like, and always being interested in drawing and making things. I kind of it was in high school woodshop. I was like, this is just made out of wood. Like, people make these. I can make these. Like, so that's just kind of what kicked it off. And then I walked down to my little local neighborhood library and got the Melvin Hiscock, like, build your own electric guitar book, and made like a completely like garbage bag Strat, like, and then it's just kind of all downhill from there, man.
You just made me remember an aha moment that I had. When I was 15, I had saved up all this money from a paper route that I had, and I bought a Gibson SG. It's the first nice guitar that I bought. And it was like probably like $1,500 or something. A lot of money for me at the time as a 15-year-old, right? Yeah. And I had it for maybe a year, and then I was in my first band in band practice, and this, it's an SG, so the strap is on the back of the neck rather than on the horn. And I had leaned forward, and the strap came unbuttoned, and it fell on the floor, and the headstock broke off. Classic Gibson story, right? And I was just crushed. But my parents were good friends with some neighbors of ours, and the guy, their friend, ran a cabinet shop out of his garage, and he saw the broken guitar, and he's like, I can glue that back together for you. And he's like, just bring it over to my garage and we'll get it fixed. And I remember going to his garage. He had a wood shop set up for cabinet making in his garage, and he like just got out his tight bond and some clamps and kind of reclamped it. And I remember sitting there going like, you could just do this? Like, who knew this could just be a way you do life? That seems amazing, Yeah.
One of the most, I'm not even sure what the word is. One of the most pivotal moments in my life was discovering that a wood glue joint is stronger than the wood around it. You can just stick wood together. Yeah.
Why don't we make guitars out of wood glue?
Exactly.
I had the exact like opposite experience when I was young. Like, I didn't have any epiphanies or like pivotal moments. Like, I was 100% a punk rocker. I bought an Ibanez RG 550. I didn't even own a case, and we played shows everywhere. I didn't own a case. I didn't, when you go buy guitar strings and like, or in the early days, or the Ernie Ball Slinkies, they were all color coded, right? There was a pink pack, an orange pack, and whatever. And there's all these words and numbers and gauges. I never read that. Like, I didn't know what those numbers meant. Gauges of string. I never read light Slinkies or regular. I just bought, hey, I like the pink color. Give me those. Like, I had no clue what was going on. I probably had different gauges from different packs. It was total punk rock. That flipping RG was a workhorse. It never gave me any problems. That was my early years. Like, I never thought about building guitars or working on guitars or modding guitars. It was just a tool.
Yeah, my experience was kind of like that too. Because we talk about, how most guitar people are dumb about guitar. They really know nothing about their instrument. And my first guitar was a piece of trash, but it 2-3 years max, and I got my second guitar, which is a Yamaha that I still have. Not once have I ever touched the setup, and it plays awesome to this day. It's got an electrical short I'm gonna have to track down, but I didn't know anything about any of that. And I was in my 40s when somebody told me to look at the cigar box guitars. I was building other things, and I looked and I was like, holy shit, you could just order fret wire and do this. And I mean, why not? I mean, it makes perfect sense. People build them, but it just never occurred to me, up until that point.
See, I wish the internet was around when I was a kid, because I had 2 guitars that I'd inherited from my dad's dad that had been in an attic for 30 or 40 years. Came down when I wanted to learn guitar, took one to a guitar shop, and they said, that's not really even a guitar. We can't fix that. You need to buy a new one. But I'm sure it was a guitar. It had been played in the past. I'm sure it could have been fixed. So we, bought another guitar. That's what I learned on. and that other one went in the bin. It could, it's an heirloom. I wish I could have fixed it. And then the other one we got out of the loft, I spent ages stripping the paint off it because it was all like tarnished and cracked and all the things I now like about old guitars. And it was dirty. I stripped it all off and tried painting it, and that never got finished. But again, who knows what happened to that? But if I had access to all the things we have access to now, those things could have been rescued, and that could have been my early guitar building. But that's all I ever did until in my 30s, really. Those 2 moments when I was 10. So listen, I was hoping to ask you a bit about, as Andrew and Mike have both been to NAMM this year, and I know Mark was keen to talk about things there. I was hoping to ask you about what it was like walking around and seeing all the other stalls and the other designs, but it sounds like you were so busy on your own booths, from what we're saying off air, that you maybe didn't get to see other things. But the question I wanted to ask was, when I go to a guitar show in the UK, I love seeing the new things, the new designs, the new elements that I haven't seen before, and if there was much of that around, other than your own, of course.
Yeah, well,
So
I was
for
going to
me-
say...
Oh, no, go ahead. Okay, fine. All right. So for me, like I didn't go representing or working the Fender booth. I mean, I got my pass through Fender, obviously, but I went on my own time. Like I wasn't working the booth or doing anything official, so I was just walking around. And that the Anaheim Convention Center is massive. And it is packed wall to wall with, it's got to be like 5,000 different booths. Like
8,000.
Crazy. 8,000. Okay. Yeah. So like there's an insane amount of just like visual and noise and just like crowds. And it's like, whoa, like, like I walked around the first day and then just like went down and like laid in my hotel bed and like stared at the ceiling, just like a bored man. I was just like, whoa, I gotta come down from this thing.
Is that your first time going to NAMM, Andrew?
No, I'd been a couple times before. And the same thing, just like walking around, but like this, it had been a long time since I'd been. And it was just like, and maybe it's just because now I'm older and like recognize like those cues when I'm like, oh, hey, I'm getting tired. I gotta go chill out. Like it's before, like the first couple of times, it's just like, I'm just like in that like starstruck mode, where it's like, ooh, great. But yeah, man, I mean, my big search was stuff that was the weird small indie guys doing stuff. Cause like, I'm so immersed in factory guitar world. Where it's like, I need to go see something weird. So that was my goal, and to meet my internet guitar builder buddies that I've haven't had a chance to like ever see in person, right? Like I was really glad to finally like make in-person contact with Sully. Like he's like the nicest dude, and he's also like 10 feet tall. It's ridiculous. like I had no idea. But yeah, man, it's a hell of an experience.
Yeah, and agreed. So I had gone to NAMM one other time just as an attendee and had that same experience that Andrew's speaking to. The scope of the show can't be overstated. It's absolutely gigantic, physically gigantic, and then the visually and sound-wise just so overwhelming. It's a cacophony of noise everywhere you go, with every instrument you can imagine being played all at once. It's like somebody said it's like Guitar Center from hell times 1,000,
That's true.
Yeah. But this year, as a first-time exhibitor, I didn't really get a chance to look around too much at all, which was kind of sad, because it is cool to walk around and see, one, guitars that you've never seen in person, to be able to pick them up and hold them and play them. Two, to meet people that you've maybe only ever talked to online. And then, just I'm a guitar dork, so I just love seeing what anybody's doing. There's some cool booths this year that I hadn't seen before. Jack White's Third Man brand had a booth that was really cool. And then the Quilter booth was really cool this year, and that was one that I had not seen in the past. They had like a whole Airstream trailer and had built this like front porch in front of it. It was really cool. But I only got to walk around the floor on the last day for maybe an hour. So I saw a teeny tiny percentage of what was there.
Yeah.
And really my focus was on finding suppliers for some of my parts. So I was like at these little booths, one for cases, I need a case supplier, and then two for some of the hardware and electronic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, because Mark, you mentioned last week we should talk about NAMM. Have you been following a lot of it then on YouTube or other media?
Yeah, just lots of kind of YouTube walkthroughs where they just kind of cover some of the stuff, some of the booths. But yeah, because I'm totally interested in like new gear also. And there's a couple of booths that kind of stood out for me, but I thought there was gonna be a lot more like talk about like all the cool new gear that came out this year at NAMM, and like we're not talking about it. It makes me sad.
Yeah. So what's the new gear that you've seen that hasn't been focused on enough then?
Oh gosh, I don't know. So I think the one thing that stood out was I think it was Reverend Guitars, and they made a Vernon Reid signature series. Like I think he's got 2 signature series now with Reverend. I love those guitars because it's got that cool like not an 80s vibe, but sort of it's just visually like busy. Like Vernon Reid loves all like just to put a bunch of stuff on his guitars. And I dig that. And I've always been a fan of like Billy Corgan. And so like Reverend Guitars, I don't own one, but now I want one for my collection.
That Vernon Reid, I've seen that guitar. I was really curious how they do that finish. Actually, it's got to be some kind of laminate or like a photo thing that gets a clear coat over it. I'm not sure how they apply it.
I need to take a look at that. I don't know. I could probably.
I'm just trying to pull a picture up for us now.
Yeah.
Your page is frozen. So.
To speak to that though, Mark, while Daniel's looking for the image, I'm a huge Reverend fan, and I grew up in Detroit, which is where Joe Naylor, the original founder of Reverend, had his shop. And so I've always thought of Reverend as and Joe Naylor as like a hometown hero, and I love what they do. I own a 335 style guitar, a Reverend 335 style guitar. Great, fantastic instrument. And this was it's one of the, I think they're made in Korea. Did they do Korea or Indonesia? I can't remember, but whatever factory they're using, the production is fantastic. They're really, really nice instruments.
Yeah, it could be either, honestly. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What immediately comes to mind for production stuff, like, that's going to be a printed, like, I don't want to trivialize it and say decal, but, that kind of process, because then you use the binding to cover the edge and you're good to go.
Yeah, when I saw them up close, it's obviously something that's pre-made and then attached onto the front, but I was wondering what their process is, because to me what it looked like was HPL, like laminate, like Formica, which is historically a thing that Reverend has done. So I wondered if they got like a HPL manufacturer, not maybe Formica brand or maybe Wilson Art or somebody, to actually print something like that as a piece of laminate that they could then attach to the guitar top, or if it was just a decal that had a clear coat over it, but the clear coat looked too perfect, if that makes sense. It looked like it was all one piece that got attached to the top.
Here's a close-up gallery. I was just looking at the description. It doesn't actually say on it.
Yeah, it's hard to tell with graphic stuff like that. Like, if you look at like, there's some Jackson like X series stuff that's got like graphics, and I know that's like how it happens. It's a printed face that gets just clear coated over.
Yeah, this doesn't look like it's in resin because
no, it had a texture to it almost.
It seems to go slightly over the edge here, like it's not on the binding, like the binding's painted on, but it's hard to tell on the picture.
Seeing it in person would really be more telling than.
Anyway, this makes for good audio if anyone's listening.
I know, yeah.
One of the things that I realise I like the most of designing is when I work with clients. And it's nothing to do with the guitar body. It might be slightly to do with the guitar body shape, but it's all to do with the imagery on it. Because for something like the one we're just looking at, thinking about how the image fits on, I will work with them I've started doing it so I only send them 4 options at a time. But I'll, for example, lay the artwork out in 4 different positions, or I'll have 4 different color schemes, or I'll have 4 different pick guard combinations, and then over backwards and forwards of a couple of weeks, you get all these. I liked A from this design, B from this design, C from this design. Combine them together, see what it looks like. Go backwards and forwards, change the odd bit, and I love that process of the kind of iterations before we get to a design that looks good, and then trying to transfer that design into a paint job. And I think that's what I enjoy the most. And I've kind of almost got to the point where maybe what I want to do is that working with someone else to realize something and doing the paint jobs more than the building. Because although I do enjoy designing, I've just made a guitar which has shape that I think is new to me anyway, where I literally got bits of templates of other guitars and did that kind of Kurt Cobain jazz stang thing where he cut up a Mustang and I cut up a bit of an SG, a bit of a Iceman and a bit of a Strat and stuck them together and jiggled it around. Came up with something I thought looked quite cool. I love doing that, but when I'm working with someone else and I get that feedback loop with them where they've got a sort of idea, I'm helping them realize it, they're suggesting things back to me, that's what I really enjoy. And it's very hard to get that as a one-man operation, making something on your own in a workshop.
You know, Andrew, when you were doing Knightro more consistently, you had built a really nice website where users could customize their own guitar, choose their woods, choose their like finishing options and stuff like that, which I thought was such a cool idea. So that's very similar to how my website still operates, which is I have preset like colors I do, preset pick guards, you know, and then a few other options. So customers do get to build their own. And we talked a little bit about this last time I was on, Daniel. And one of the things I agree with you that's super fun is a customer will kind of build out a guitar to whatever specs and colors and stuff that they want. And I get that order. And sometimes I'm like, oh, cool combination that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. And there are other times where I'm like, I don't think this is going to look good at all. But it's always fun to talk then to the customer and be like, I see you picked A, B, and C. What if we did A, B, and D? You know,
yeah, right.
Better, you know.
For me, like, cause yeah, like my little customizer menu on my website, like, cause I didn't, a lot of times I would, cause I didn't make the distinction in my website, like, you know, between standard scale and multi-scale stuff, right? It's like, hey, I want a 6-string multi-scale, whatever. A lot of times people would then pick pickups where it's like, ooh, those are only for straight scale. So I gotta kind of, you know, you gotta kind of steer, you know, because I'm never gonna be able to get like, you know, a super distortion on a multi-scale bass plate like from DiMarzio. That's not gonna happen. Like, and you know, so a lot of times it was just little stuff like that for me, just like steering people, like, you know, that's not going to work quite how you think it is, but what if we did this? And a lot of times, like, because I don't have a lot of models with like that have opportunities for different like combinations. Like, I don't have many pick guards. I think I have 1 or 2 models with pick guards, and it's a lot of times people just want like, yeah, I want the black one. Okay. But no, with Mike's designs, they're so much more, they lend themselves so much more to being like really interesting with their color choices. Like, and that's something dude, I love your designs. Like,
oh, thanks,
like,
man.
Yeah. Like, well, from the first one you did, like when we were working together at the wood shop, I was like, damn, he's got the eye. Oh no. It's like, you know, second indie shop 2 miles from me. I'm just gonna crap. But even though,
right.
But we're totally,
I'm gonna grab it. It's right.
But you know, even with that, like, we both have a very different aesthetic that we chase.
This is like, the first one that I made under Andrew's tutelage.
Yeah, man. Dude, I still love that thing. It's cool.
You can definitely see the aesthetic link to your current design.
Right. It's so funny. Like the headstock is just a real crappy version of the headstock I do now. It's like the same basic design elements are there. Mm-hmm. And that this is a pretty direct ripoff of the Music Man Albert Lee, which I think is one of the coolest guitars ever.
I still love that thing.
Yeah. I've scavenged it for parts. It's not even playable anymore, but it's a nice guitar.
It's still like my first several iterations of kind of my core models as I was developing my aesthetic. Like I can see the like roots of what became what I consider my favorite version of my output. But I look at some of the earliest stuff and it's like, ugh, I don't know, man. Like my first couple of headstocks were like, no, that ain't it. But I mean, we all go through that, looking back at our past work and be like, man, I'm glad I've moved on.
Well, that's an important element of the design, right? Those iterations and choices of things that we look back on now and we think are crappy, but that's only because they've led to something that we now know is better or right for us.
Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, you spent a little bit of time at a luthiery school, didn't you?
Yeah. So post my time in the Army, I was at Guitar Craft Academy at Musicians Institute. So I did that before I moved back to Florida. And that wasn't my first guitar building experience, but it was the only formal training I have as a guitar builder. And that was a lot more that actually kind of like really informed the kind of the structure of my process. Even though I do stuff way differently now than I would have back then. But and that school doesn't even exist anymore. It's just gone. And I don't know if they even have the Nashville version anymore. But the reason I asked,
I was going to say the reason I asked was when you and I met, I think you had come pretty freshly from the luthiery school, and you had one of the instruments you'd built while you were there, which, if I recall, was a Telecaster style guitar, wasn't it?
It was
that blue one.
Yeah, the blue one. Yeah. It was more. I mean, kind of like that green guy. It was kind of like the first kind of toddler version of that.
And I remember you kind of like during the time that you were working in the shop with me, you were kind of refining what the Knightro brand was going to be, and you would have these sort of iterations where the headstock was slightly different, or you'd change a few things. It was really cool to watch you sort of hone in on what your aesthetic was as a guitar maker.
Yeah. It's been a long process. I mean, I was sketching on another new version of this thing last night. Well, I gotta do something that's for my own, kind of satisfaction sometimes,
I think it's a lot of the conversations I have with anyone on here when I'm thinking back to what I'm doing, because often any conversation we have is inspirational in some way. I always think about that trying to balance of what you just said, like something for you to do, something I want to do for myself, but also trying to find a way, because if you're running it as a business, to strike that balance up.
Yeah.
Don't know where I'm going there. This is more like a self-help afternoon for me.
Well, I mean, that is a balance. So like, running for my own work, it took me the first couple of years I was doing it. Like I had a really wide range of body styles and just configuration, and it was just like everything was one off, like something different. But then it's like, oh man, every time I build a guitar, I'm investing so much time in making new templates and figuring out how am I going to accomplish this feature. Whereas the last couple of years I was building prior to getting this gig, I really focused on developing like, okay, what is this is my core model and identity, and this is what I can sell I can make repeatedly, relatively easily, but that still feels like something that I feel proud of.
Yeah.
Because I never wanted to make hey, coming from Fender guy now, I never wanted to make a Strat or a Tele, but that's, you also have to, you realize as a builder, well, that's what people want to buy. So it's like, how do I make something that I'm, excited and proud about without doing something that's just purely sales driven. That's the line everyone's got to figure out for themselves, as a builder.
So I was listening to, I think it was a Rick Beato podcast a couple days ago, and it was after the Grammys, and he was really admonishing basically everything about the Grammys, which I think, maybe we can all relate to a little bit. But one of the things that he had talked about, and I've seen several other podcasters talk about this in the last year or so, was how the music industry has become so profit driven, and bands are not really doing anything organic anymore. It's all a very prepackaged, for sales kind of thing. And how music in the past, and there's several probably times in the past where bands were doing things that were wholly unique and creative, and then the music industry formed around that rather than the other way around. And something that I try to keep in mind, and I'm not saying I'm good at this at all, is like, it's like a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Like if you have a refined thing that you're doing well, even if it's your own and it's super unique, if it's good, people will latch onto it, And I think Andrew is a good example of that. Andrew's the first person who ever showed me what a multi-scale guitar was. I didn't even know what that was before I met Andrew. And so to see Andrew sort of jumping on what has now become a very popular way of building guitars, but doing something that to me, as a longtime guitar player, I'd never seen before. And the first time I played one of Andrew's Knightro guitars, I was like, this is amazing. And it's so unique and so different from anything I've ever played before. I just thought, of course, there's a home for this because it's really well done, And I try to keep that in mind, living in this world where, of course, to maintain what we're doing, we need to make sales. But if you are only thinking about sales, you're going to end up with a watered down product, and the product won't be unique. How many people build Telecaster copies? Like, you can't compete in that world. It's unrealistic. Right. So finding a unique thing that is yours, and then the probably the most important thing is do it really well. Like, do the best version of that unique thing that you can, and hopefully, if you can get it in front of enough eyes, it'll catch. But all easier said than done, of course.
Yeah. And I also feel like it depends how you seek validation for everything. Because obviously you could do this really unique, amazing thing. It can be brilliant, and some people like it, and it may never be a big thing that everyone knows.
And I don't think that should be the goal, right? Like, exactly. If everyone liked it, that would be bad. That would be that's like bubblegum pop. I don't want to be involved in anything that's bubblegum pop,
I always wonder how many songs are out there written by people that have never made it big that I would love. That would be my favorite song that I've never had a chance to listen to.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's never got to me in the right way.
Man, this reminds me, I'm going to go off on a huge tangent here. This reminds me of a Simpsons episode, The Simpsons, where Homer Simpson finds out he's got a long lost brother who basically owns a car company. And he asks Homer to design a car because he thinks Homer's like the everyman, right? The Joe Schmo. And so basically Homer gets on a little napkin and he draws the most absurd, crazy, far out car. And he shows it to the engineers. And the engineers come back and they make this like homogenized, slick version of what his idea was that basically appeals to this mass audience. And he's like, no, I want what's on the napkin. Right. And so basically the engineers call up, the owner, and they're like, this guy's crazy. And he's like, build it. So they build it, and it's this monstrosity, and the brother goes out of business.
That was good.
Well, maybe that's how we should end today. I don't know. Do you know the Hudsucker proxy? Because this reminds me of that with Tim Robbins, and he's a lowly worker in this company, and I can't remember the exact plot loop, but for some reason he becomes the head of the company. It's something to do with inheritance and tax and money, and he's got these crazy ideas. That's why they make him the head, because they know he can make the company basically fail so that the owners of the company, the trustees, can make lots of money out of it failing, because he keeps drawing ideas on napkins that are circles. He's like, look at this. And it's a drawing of a circle. It's for the kids. And he's just so passionate about this drawing. And no one knows what it is. They think he's mad. They're making him the head. And he designs the first Frisbee. And it becomes a world-selling, amazing thing. And then he designs the hula hoop. And it makes them huge amounts of money from these little drawings that he's got on the paper. It's how you interpret and get those things to the right places. So listen, if anyone's watching in the future or listening in the future, do let us know if you've got anything that you think we've missed or that you could add to the discussion, because I love reading the comments to sort of extend the conversation beyond just the day that we do the podcast. But I was talking to Mark and Scott off air. I think we're going to change how the podcast works a bit in the next month or two. We've got a few guests lined up, but I'm keen to not have new guests on anymore, because it's quite a lot of work getting new people in. And we have so many interesting people on, like Mike and Andrew, who are on once and don't come back. So like today's proven, having people back for a second time to have a conversation about things that aren't necessarily just the history of how they got into guitar building is really valid and could lead to loads of new, interesting conversations, directions for us. So if you're listening and you've been on before, let me know if you want to come back. That'd be brilliant. So thanks again, Mike and Andrew, for joining us. Mark and Scott, as always, and everyone that's listening. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good time, guys.
Cheers, Andrew. Thanks. The Guitar Builders Collective is a group of like-minded people from all around the world at different stages of their guitar building journey. You can join us over on our forum to seek advice or share tips on guitar building processes, materials and tools, or just to share your builds. On YouTube, we have a regular podcast of guitar building chat where you can join the live stream or watch back on past episodes. Our Instagram page shares posts of members' builds and links you direct to their accounts. And for those of you on Facebook, we've got a private group that you can join, share and chat along with. The Guitar Builders Collective is a welcome and open space for all, so do pop by and say hi.